Great German reformer. And in his biography, Martin Luther made this statement. He says, "My schedule is so busy today, I must get up early and spend at least 4 hours in prayer if I want to see the tasks accomplished." Martin Luther had the right idea. I'm not going to worry about my schedule. I am going to pray, because if I don't, my whole day is going to go awry. And Jesus was a busy man, and he got up early to pray. I want you to look at the passage afterwards, the verses after, verse 36. "And Simon and those who were with him searched for him." The Greek word to search for him is prosdioko. It means to persecute. It means to look for diligently. It means to go after and to not give up until you find the guy. Simon came out and he said, "You know what? I'm not going to stop looking for Jesus, because everybody is knocking on the door again wanting Jesus' attention." And when he found him, he said, "Everyone's looking for you. Where did you go?" I love Jesus' answer, but he said to them, "Let us go into the next towns, that I may preach there also, because for this purpose have I come forth." You know what that tells me? It tells me that Jesus was so busy, he had all these urgent needs, all these things pressing on him, and he said, "I'm going to get up early to find my time with God." One thing that Jesus did that you and I must do, we must shut out the world. We are just enamored. You know, I look at these kids with all these stuff stuck in their ears, their pads with all the phones, and you're okay, Josh, I know you're looking at the Bible right now. And we're just our senses are constantly bombarded with stuff all the time. And our culture today doesn't know how to shut out the world. We don't know how to be quiet. The psalmist said, "Be still and know that I am God." I love to get up in the mountains and be alone with God, and to hear the breeze, and to hear the birds, and to listen to the bubbling of the water coming down the mountainside, because I know it's the music of God. And so Jesus did that. He shut the world out, and he shut himself in with God. What a wonderful place to be, shut in with God and the world shut out. And that's what Jesus did. And you know what Jesus was able to do? This is so important. Jesus was able to discern the difference between the urgent and the necessary. You see, we spend so much of our time worrying about what's urgent. Oh, I've got to do this. I've got to fix that. And we as men, we are fixers. We want to get things done, and we feel like these things are really urgent. And sometimes moms are that way. Sometimes housewives are that way. But you know what? The things that are needful are more important. And those are the things that are spiritual. You see, Jesus could spend all of his time just healing sick people all day long, casting out devils all day long, and forgot the most important reason that he came, and that is to preach the gospel of the kingdom, that everlasting life is available to all men. And Jesus got his priorities right because he spent time in prayer. That's our first example. Our second example is found in Luke chapter 6, verse 12. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. That's the order of the Gospels in the New Testament. Matthew, then Mark, then Luke, and then John. And so Luke chapter 6 and verse 12. "And it happened..." I'm in chapter 5. "Now it came to pass in those days." Now I'm going to be teaching a lesson on how to study the Bible starting this Wednesday night. And one of the things that you look for in Bible study is time indicators. And you have right here a time indicator. You have a pronoun, those, which days. It's the near demonstrative pronoun in the Greek language. And you say, so what? Well, the near demonstrative shows you what just occurred. Well, what just occurred? Why is it so important that Jesus prayed right then? In those days that he went into a mountain. In those days, well, what was going on in those days? They were fixing to start a campaign of opposition to Jesus. And Jesus knew that if his work was to succeed him, if his work was going to prosper after his death, he was going to have to find men of character, men who were godly, men who were committed to following out the task all the way to death if necessary. And in those days, Jesus went into the mountain to pray. So the first example was keeping our priorities right. The second example is when you have a weighty decision to make, because spiritual ramifications will spill over because of that decision. Jesus exemplified prayer in both those situations. So he went up into the mountain to pray, and he what? He continued all night. He continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called his disciples to himself, and from them he chose 12. Jesus had a weighty decision to make. It says in those days he was facing strong opposition to his ministry. Again, we see the pattern of Jesus. Going up into a quiet place, isolated alone, Jesus was shutting the world out. And Jesus was shutting himself in with God. The duration of his prayer shows that Jesus had an intimate relationship with his Father. Without it, there is no power in our lives. You remember when Jesus came down from the mountaintop? He was up there during the Mount of Transfiguration with the three disciples, James, John, and Peter. When he came down, a father had brought a demonic son to the disciples. The disciples could not cast this demon out. They had no power. They had no authority. They had no spiritual impetus. And Jesus simply looked at this child and he said, "Demon, be gone." They came to him later and they said, "Jesus, why couldn't we cast the disciple out?" Jesus said, "This kind cometh forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting." Now, did Jesus pray and fast to get rid of the demon? No. But Jesus had a lifestyle of walking with God, and he had the power when it was necessary. Whenever decisions were made, Jesus spent all night in prayer. The duration of his prayer showed that he had an intimate relationship with God that was unbroken communion. Before Jesus chose those 12, he spent the entire night in prayer. Before he made this weighty decision, who's going to succeed me? Who's going to carry on this ministry? The entire Christendom, folks, rested on 12 ordinary common men. Christianity wouldn't even exist today if Jesus, of course, hadn't gone to the cross and raised from the dead. But what if these 12 men that he selected would have just washed out? He had to have the key men around him. And folks, when you're making a weighty decision, you need to spend long seasons with God in prayer. Let me give you an example of decisions that were made without prayer and how they went wrong. From the book of Joshua, I'm just going to tell you one. I had two of them written down, but I'm just going to tell you one story. It was the story of the Gibeonites. Israel was commanded to go in and purge the land of Canaan. God's wrath had come on these people. For 400 years they had walked in paganism. They were sacrificing children. They were committing hideous acts in their worship services. And God said, enough is enough. And if you guys don't cleanse Canaan of these folks, it's all going to filter down into your lifestyles, and it's also going to impede you to be a light to other people. And I want a sanctified nation unto myself. So there was a group of people called the Gibeonites, and they heard what Joshua was doing, the victories that he was having in battle, the complete victories that was being won by the Israelites, and so they got an idea. we're going to pretend like we came from a distant country, and we're going to deceive Joshua, and we're going to make a covenant with Joshua. Now, God had specifically told Joshua, you don't make any covenants with any of these folks. So they got their old raggedy clothes out. They got old shoes, old sandals. They even took bread with mold on it, and they took wineskins that were old and worn out, and they came and they presented all these things to Joshua. He says, look at our clothes. They're old and ragged. Look at our shoes. They're worn out. Look at the wineskins. It was fresh wine and new wineskins when we left on this journey. We've come from a long country because we've heard about your God, and we want you to make a covenant with us. This is what it says in Joshua 9:14. They took their provisions. They looked at the provisions and said, yeah, sure enough. The next part of the verse says, and they didn't ask counsel from God. They didn't pray about it. And they made the wrong decision that haunted them the rest of Israel's life. So, when making a big decision and wanting to have our priorities right, Jesus exemplified to us the type of prayer life we ought to have. The third verse, and we're not going to talk much about it. We're just going to look at the way the disciples lived their life after Jesus had gone back to heaven. Turn to Luke chapter 18 and verse 1. I'm sorry, Luke 11:1. Now it came to pass, as he was praying in a certain place. I hope you guys are starting to see the pattern in Jesus' life. He got up early in the morning. He went out into a desert place. He stayed up all night and he went into a mountain. And in Luke chapter 11 it says, now it came to pass as he was praying in a certain place, when he had ceased, one of his disciples said to him, what a beautiful petition. It's a petition of urgent entreaty. And that's the way it's translated. It's translated as a command. In the Greek language, it's an imperative. And it's not so much in the sense of a command, but it's a plea of strong intensity. The word teach is in the imperative mood, and it's showing a longing desire. Teach us to pray. What a wonderful thing to come and ask the Lord to do. Folks, I'm convinced that if you will come with a sincere heart today, when you leave this church, and you just say, Lord, teach me to pray, God will answer that. He will. He'll begin to show you how to pray. I want to show you the disciples' life. You see, when they wanted to be taught how to pray, the real measure of how well someone teaches, and Amy, you can probably testify to this, it's not how good you plan your lessons, but is when they bring their homework and they got it, and they did it, and they did it right. You see, Colonel Hall's a coach, and the test of his coaching isn't how well he's got the workouts organized, but it's on meet day. And when the gun goes off, and that 400-meter runner doesn't start to tie up in the last 50 meters, that's the evidence that he did it right. And the evidence that Jesus taught these guys right is by one measure, one standard, they prayed. It's that simple. After Jesus was gone, these men prayed. They got it. They caught it. They saw the vision. They saw the example, and they took it to heart. In Acts chapter 1 and verse 8, Jesus said to them, but ye shall be witnesses unto me both in Jerusalem and all Judea and in Samaria and unto the uttermost part of the earth. But you better wait until the Holy Spirit comes and you are powered from on high. So they waited and they tarried in Jerusalem. But you know what they did? They didn't wait passively.